I put up a clip of a Iraqi astronomer who was basically arguing that no, the Earth is absolutely flat because it says so in the Quran, blah blah blah. So I put this up. I didn't editorialize anything. I just put up the clip. A scientist, a fellow evolutionary scientist from California, wrote to me, I mean publicly on the thread, to paraphrase her sentiment. She was saying, well, I mean, why are you putting this up? Why are you making fun of these marginalized people? Why are you doing this? So her instinct, her reflex, was not to say, how could a fellow scientist actually spew such nonsense? She was upset at me for pointing out his nonsense. And we need to kind of get past this obstacle. Otherwise, I think it's going to be a very, very nasty battle.
Right. I mean, and what bothers me about this is that you can have said, the Shahada, or, you can have called yourself a Muslim yesterday.
Right.
And you are now someone who can speak for Islam.
Right.
Meanwhile, if you are criticizing Islam, you have to be a scholar, you have to have a PhD, who speaks fluent Arabic, who is ethnically, like dark or brown, and all these things. I mean, and these politics of what makes an authentic critic versus a non-authentic. I mean, and you'll find that there is no such thing as an authentic critic of Islam.
Well, I'll tell you a great anecdote on exactly that point. So I've debated with Muslims and non-Muslims alike about various things. And so let's say I'll point to, do you know who Yusuf al-Qaradawi is? Do you know? Yeah. So he is one of the preeminent Sunni Islamic scholars. I mean, he has about as clean a pedigree of an Islamic scholar as you can have. I mean, he's, I think, now in his 80s. He's the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. I think he originally comes from Al-Azhar University in Cairo. I mean, he's the man, okay? Mm-hmm. Guess when I quote something by him or by al-Baghdadi, the so-called caliph of ISIS who has a PhD in Islamic studies. Guess what people will say about these two guys?
They're not real Muslims.
Exactly. I mean, right? Their friend Ahmad, who goes drinking with them and parties, and who's a very nice Muslim, that's the true Muslim. But Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi or Caliph of ISIS with a PhD in Islamic studies, they just don't understand. They're fake Muslims.
So this is so destructive, right? Because these politics of you have to be deemed to be authentic, and who is the one that's deciding who is or isn't authentic, right? I mean, there's a certain media type like elite. I don't want to say elite. That's a weird word, but there are a certain group of people who get to decide who is or isn't authentic, who does or doesn't count as, somebody who can speak for Islam, speak for Muslims, or speak against Islam and against Muslims. And it's a weird marriage between, and you've talked about this many times, about postmodernism and cultural relativism and moral relativism. So it's a strange marriage between postmodernism and the relativisms that go along with it, and this desire to legitimately protect what they feel is an embattled, a besieged minority. And it becomes a very toxic thing. And what I want to talk about, and what I have been talking about, is that it's harmful to Muslims. It's harmful to progress, because no one is allowed to speak about, the harms that they have. And it really is extremists who change the dialogue, right? So it is the people who will point out the worst in what is happening that gets people to pay attention to a trend overall, right? So we have to give these voices some credibility. We have to be able to listen to them, and that includes both extremist Islamic scholars. We have to look at them and say, there are people who are thinking like this, and they have some legitimacy in the text, and we have to talk about that as a real thing rather than just dismissing it, which is what's happening. It's just being dismissed.
Well, I think it's because the reality is that they can't provide counterpoints to something that you offer, and so they have to literally attack the messenger, right? I mean, the idea is the way you determine who is an authentic voice for Islam is whether the person who is speaking is saying things that we can test their veracity, right? I mean, that's in a reasonable debate, that's what determines whether what you're saying makes sense or not. So when Ben Affleck attacks Sam Harris, are you the guy who speaks for Muslims? I mean, nobody said that he's the guy who speaks for Muslims. But if he makes a verifiable point, which can either be proven to be false or true, then he's contributed to the debate. But if you don't have the capacity or are unwilling to navigate through the arguments, then you say, well, who are you, Sam Harris? You're some California white boy. How dare you, right? So I think that's the reason, right? It's you have to, if you like, behead figuratively the messenger, because if the message gets out, then you lose the debate, right? And
right. And those are, I mean, they're dirty politics, right? And we've seen the way what Majid is being called, and he's a Muslim, right? And he's being called porch monkey, lapdog.
And he doesn't identify himself as an ex-Muslim, right? He identifies himself as somebody who is still within the faith, correct?
Right. He is a believer as far as I know, and he identifies himself as a believer. And I mean, if he can't speak for Muslims, and he can't
with his pedigree, exactly.
What it means is that Islam stays the way it is. Right. Because we have this vision of what we feel Islam is in our minds, and that is the only, and people who are saying exactly that are the people that are going to be supported, and anyone that says anything else is not going to be supported. So what happens is that there's no progress, there's no change. To some extent, you have to be able to look at, what's happening in your own communities of harm to move forward. And Western communities can do that to their own, and that's why they can progress. And so you're kind of dooming, these Absolutely. Muslim communities to just this place where they can't move forward, right?
Exactly.
And it's quite tragic.